Hi, and welcome back to Verity Babs Art, where I talk to my friends about art. Today, I spoke to comedian and playwright Dom O'Keefe, and we spoke about The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, we spoke about improv, and we spoke about when it's appropriate to call yourself an artist. And I hope you enjoy it. And also, just want to apologise for all the sniffing and blowing my nose. I'm filming this in hay fever central. I'm here with Dom O'Keefe. Dom, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dom. I write comedy stuff and improvise comedy stuff.
And you picked Wander Above the Sea of Fog by Friedrich today.
Well, Verity, I was once in a class and a teacher used this as an example of what the sublime is, right? And so I think that's the first time I can remember properly looking at this painting, to be like, this is humans being surrounded by a massive amount of sort of nature that is both overwhelming and sort of awe-inspiring at the same time. And I think it is quite quite a beautiful painting, and that's why I like it.
It's so beautiful, and it is that thing of, you've climbed to the top of the mountain and you look out over the rest of the landscape and you realise that even though you've tried really hard to climb to the top of the mountain, you're still completely insignificant.
And presumably, because this guy, this sort of gingery man who's on his own seemingly, he's got a lot of trouble. He's in a lot of trouble now because he's got to get home, and he's basically lost amongst all this fog, and he's got to sort of go from rock to rock trying to retrace his steps. There's a sense of he has conquered nature, right? He's climbed up and he is the human that has, got to the top of all of it and is looking out at all this like accomplishment and all this kind of nature that he's managed to better. At the same time, it looks so dangerous. Like 5 seconds after this painting was finished, he slipped down and horrifically injured himself. But also, right, presumably there is a painter that is also up the mountain with him looking at this guy. And it makes me think of those like Instagram and like Facebook photos you see of like people in beautiful places, but then you realize that they're like boyfriend, girlfriend, partner is hanging off the side of like a car taking this photograph of them. So I don't know how this painting came about and whether like who that person is, whether that is Caspar David Friedrich or is that a friend of his. But potentially they had to like stand there for ages, like whilst the guy sketched it all out and got his paints and did it all. So maybe this is actually an incredibly boring thing for them to actually have to make.
Yeah, because I mean, if this is taken in, in a studio, he's just spent hours painting a guy's back, and then he puts the rest in it, and it becomes this, really famous piece about nature and about, the development of man and society. But actually, he's just spent hours looking at this guy's back. And is visual art something that you look at a lot, something that you've been exposed to a lot?
No. Visual art is, I feel like I'm not a massively visual person. So particularly like when we were putting together poster designs and stuff for like shows that we were going to take up to like the Edinburgh Fringe and stuff, I'd often have like sketch out something and then take it along to an actual photographer or a friend who was like going to make it into a little poster for us. And mine were all made on like Microsoft Paint and with like horrible, ill-balanced, really clashing colors. And then other people would interpret that and make it something that we could actually hand to members of the public. I don't remember like going to museums or anything or art galleries as a kid. It was more like on school trips sometimes we'd be taken along and have to look at stuff. But I really like, I watched one of the other episodes and you talked about slow looking, right?
Yeah.
And I really enjoy doing that, just sitting or standing in front of a painting and thinking about like, how did this come to be? Like, what does this mean? What was the intention that the artist had? And what were the accidental messages that they painted in that they weren't necessarily meaning to like capture?
It's interesting you mentioned about school trips, because it is that thing of a lot of people, their only sort of exposure to galleries is through school trips, and a school trip is not key slow looking time. Like, you're sort of given free rein for a bit and everyone's mucking about, and the kids who are into art probably have already got access to art in some other way, so they're not that fussed either. So no one, I remember the raucousness of school trips to galleries. You are also currently a teacher.
Yes, yeah.
In the dramatic arts.
Yeah, speech and drama is what I teach, like extracurricular. I'm not a real teacher. I don't want to claim a real teacher, but I do like lunchtimes and after schools and speaking in public,
and there is a hugely visual element to acting. Shaken Not Stirred has these amazing props that you just use for everything.
Deliberately, that's our improvised James Bond show that we do, and we wanted it to look very charmingly rubbish. We wanted it to
does
feel...
look.
Thank you. We achieved it. Because we wanted it to feel really silly, because they're fundamentally ridiculous films, the James Bond films, especially the older ones. Like, Roger Moore does not look like he's ever killed a man, but yet he's pretending to be the world's most dangerous, most accomplished spy, whilst his toupee hangs off one side of his head. And all of the running shots are actually stunt doubles, because he's mid-50s and hasn't run in 20 odd years by the time they're filming these. And we wanted that to be reflected in the visual aesthetic of our show, and to make it very clear that it was family friendly. This was basically some pals playing dress up and make believe and just inviting you into this kind of weird friendship, because I think especially with improv, it's really good for parodying other things, and it's by its very nature gonna have little mistakes in there, and if you try and make it too polished, then it sometimes loses some of the joy of seeing people just making stuff up on a stage and seeing that panic on their faces when they get given a suggestion that they don't know how to handle.
Obviously, it's improv drama. The point is this immersiveness.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you pick this piece that is so immersive, and you're just drawn into the enormity of this landscape. I'm not even sure how big this is IRL. I'm going to have a little look. I'm also going to cut out me saying IRL. It's nearly a meter by 80. Just under a meter, right? Okay. So hefty.
Quite big, yeah.
Hefty. Is this something a typical thing for you to be visually drawn to?
I like, stuff that's quite beautiful, and stuff where, even though I don't know anything about painting, right? I don't know how half this stuff was done, but you can tell that a huge amount of skill and time has been put into it. And that's something that with comedy as well. I remember I was listening to a radio interview with an old comedy writer who was working in the 60s and stuff. And he was talking about how you need the audience to be impressed with your comedy, and to make it look as though a lot of work has gone into it to win over certain people.
Yeah.
So you get very intricate wordplay, or interestingly chosen metaphors that can't have just been thought up on the spot, and that's what impresses people. And that's, I guess, what I'm impressed by here, is that it is, I guess, very simple on this. It's a man stood in front of some nature. That's all it is. But there's so many little brush strokes, and it's just fascinating to look at.
It's incredibly detailed, and that is one of the things that I think a lot of people have who wouldn't necessarily say, I love art and I see art all the time. But one of the big things for them is, but at least you can tell that the person who's made it has gone to a lot of effort.
Yeah.
So if they don't particularly like it, they sort of respect it for that. And that's why a lot of people have a big problem with modern art and contemporary art, where it's come on, you could have done that in half an hour, and It's particularly things that are, found objects like Tracy Emin's bed, or, Duchamp just attaches his bicycle wheel to a stool. And people get really, really cross about it, about this idea that it hasn't taken them any time, it hasn't really taken them much effort. And the idea that, well, it's all about the idea, it's about the concept. There's, this whole idea of, my 5-year-old could have done that. If a toddler could have done it, that really annoys people. And it annoys them more to say, but your child didn't do it.
I guess I probably do struggle a little bit with some artwork that looks like it was done very quickly. Find it harder to connect with that. This is something that I talked about a lot with other writers. Like, life is hard for most people. Life is a bit rubbish, and people get home and they're tired from their long day of work, and they have an argument with their family members, and their kids are running around, and we just want art to entertain us and give us a bit of escapism. And so when a TV show is uber harrowing, or when a piece of art is feels a bit sort of like it was more indulgent for the artist to create it, and they were doing it because they wanted to, not because they thought anyone would ever enjoy looking at it. That I guess I struggle with a little bit. We're all just bits of microorganisms that have overgrown massively and gotten out of hand on a bit of rock spinning in nothing, and our time is fundamentally limited, and why would I waste 10 minutes looking at an unmade bed when I have one at home that I could look at?
Such a beautiful loop back to The Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, is that he's just an overgrown microorganism.
Yep.
I think it was a couple of years ago now, and this example of, if it is more fulfilling for you to make it, and this sort of self-satisfaction of making art. There was a play in Oxford by some BA students, I didn't go to see, but I wish I had, that as you walked in, and I think it got put in the news, basically as you walked into this quite angsty play, there was a blender full of water and a goldfish, a live goldfish, that you'd walk past. And you were sort of invited, hypothetically, to blend the goldfish if you want to. And it is just that thing of this is arty. I've made this decision to make this play where you can blend this goldfish. Aren't I clever? And obviously no one wants to do that, because people have just gone out to see a play. They're probably just there to support their mates. They want to not do their essay. They don't have to be confronted with the fact of should I or should I not blend a goldfish?
I feel like I've probably been responsible for a lot of very indulgent shows where the audience were there, but we were having a great time playing make-believe and pretending to be Roger Moore on stage, and the narrative barely sort of hung together, and we didn't quite get around to using all the suggestions in the end. And I guess it's that thing of, when you see something that you dislike about yourself reflected in someone else, it winds you up. Because you're like, no, you're better than that, when you actually mean, I'm better than that, I should stop doing that. So maybe as a writer improviser, I am wound up by stuff that looks half-hearted, because it makes me worry about stuff I've done that has felt half-hearted. Wow, so deep.
I didn't let you know this is actually a therapy session. The whole idea of being an artist in itself is a peculiar thing. And some people take to that title far more than others. And you are someone who creates art in, a performing art sense and in a written sense. But would you ever be like, I am an artist?
No, not at all. And partly, actually, I just finished a master's in basically play and screenwriting. And it's really interesting. We had this discussion about how we have this vision of the artist as being this slightly mad person that kind of locks themselves away, for months at a time, and sort of doesn't function as a regular human being, almost like the kind of Sherlock Holmes sort of mad brilliance, and then they'll come out with a best-selling, book or an amazing award-winning play or whatever, just ready to go. And actually that's an incredibly unhealthy view, because that way madness lies. Actually, writing especially is, I think, more of a craft. It's the more you do it, the better you get. And there are certain rules that you need to learn, and you can then break those rules later on. But it's much better to think of it as, no, this is like a job that I'm doing that I'm going to get better at. And that way, I think you can also kind of like kill your ideas that don't work, which is a really important thing to do. Like self-editing is really important. And if you think of it as like, this is my vocation, these are my babies that I am bringing into the world, these little sketches or characters or ideas, then you become incredibly protective of them. Whereas actually you just need to like cut a load of stuff in order to make it work. There are other people that probably are writers doing similar stuff to me that think or see themselves as artists, and that's great, but I personally don't.
And the idea of this sort of obsessed artist, they're absolutely obsessed with what they do, means that lots of people who are artists, who make stuff, but also, you know, in order to pay their bills, have another job, makes them feel like they can't really say they're an artist because they aren't, you know, in their studio 24/7 creating things. And it does just mean that unless you are sort of wealthy enough to be able to just spend all your time in the studio or behind your laptop writing your book, then sort of no one really feels comfortable enough to be like, I once wrote a play, but I wouldn't say that I'm a writer. It was like, I guess you are a writer because you've written something, you know.
Exactly. And that's maybe one of the reasons why it tends to be people that come from a wealthy family and a wealthy background that tend to prevail in the arts, because they're the people that can afford to have their 20s and 30s, you know, sitting at home not paying rent, but, you know, being able to do lots of creating, so they get the time to develop those skills. On the masters that I did, we had a lot of visiting kind of lecturers and people, like amazing writers who've had works at the National Theatre and like in the West End, and all of them pretty much were still like struggling to define themselves as a writer, because they still have, you know, other bits and pieces that they do in order to pay their bills, like coming and being guest lecturers on that course. One of them, I remember, she just, we went and saw her play in the West End on a trip, and she was like, I wouldn't have been able to get here if my husband wasn't like a doctor, if he didn't have a regular job. And that's, people don't like talking about that, but it's just a fact.
Yeah. There are elements of gendered stuff coming into play there, where it's like, I would spend half my time in the studio making art, but I had to spend the other half of my time looking after my kids. And this idea that, well, if you're not in your studio 24/7, then you're not an artist.
Right now, it's a funny time, right, in lockdown, because some people will turn to you and go, oh, it's perfect. This is the time where you can, you know, you've got the time to write something or to paint something or to create something. This will be great for you.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, but all the stuff that is inspiring about life has all stopped. So like you can't go out and see your friends, or, you know, previously, you know, couldn't go out for more than like an hour a day of exercise, which is not necessarily conducive to feeling really free and creative and making really interesting decisions. And probably plays up, you know, most creatives. Actually, I'd say most people probably have like, you know, mental health, right? Like it's like regular health. We are all affected by it in some way, just some people more or less so than others. And obviously right now, mental health is being, it's kind of pressurized for everyone. And that probably doesn't help people who are creating, who tend to do a lot of staring out into a sea of fog and thinking about the meaning of life anyway.
Dom, it has been an absolute treat to talk to you. Could you just let us know where we can follow you, hear from you, what you're doing next?
There's a couple of improv shows that I'm normally involved with, and as and when performances are allowed again, we'll start doing some shows. So Shaken Not Stirred, the improvised James Bond film, and the show that must not be named, which is improvised Harry Potter, are the two main ones that I regularly perform with. So yeah, check those out.
Thanks so much for watching. You can follow Dom and his shows in the ways written below. You can follow me at VerityBabsArt on Instagram, and please do give us a subscribe, a share, a like, and I'll see you next week.